First one comes from David Stindl Rast, who says, sometimes people get the mistaken notion that spirituality is a separate department of life, the penthouse of existence. But rightly understood, it is a vital awareness that pervades all realms of our being, wherever we may come alive. And that is the area in which we are spiritual. And then Deepak Chopra says, when you are fully aware, you can center yourself at will. You are familiar with the place of peace and empowerment inside. You aren't divided against yourself by inner conflicts. You can transcend local disturbances and remain unaffected by them. You see the world from an expanded perspective. Your inner world is organized. And then from the Psalms, in all your ways acknowledge God, and God will direct your paths. Okay, what I want to deal with today is the subject of spirituality. And you know, in the Bible, there are a number of different models of spirituality. One, for instance, is John the Baptist. And you know, John was this character, sort of a wild character who walked barefoot out through the wilderness of Palestine, you know, soles of his feet probably real thick and tough. He ate bugs and honey, kind of a strict diet. It probably made him weak and frail and gave him bad breath, but still he was this spiritual character. You know, what this lifestyle really made him was a supercalifragilistic plagued with halitosis.
It's food.
Something quite atrocious.
I just had to share that. I'm sorry. Spirituality. What is it? Not a rhetorical question. What's spirituality? What does it mean to be spiritual?
It's walking in the desert.
Walking in the desert.
Connected.
Connected.
A sense of the other.
A sense of the other.
I think it's a willingness to be yourself and to think your own thoughts.
A willingness to be yourself and think your own thoughts.
It's perspective that goes past the everyday mundane in the flesh and all the other issues. It's a step higher.
Perspective that goes past the everyday mundane. And then I didn't get the last part.
A step higher.
Step higher. Okay. What is spirituality? What does it mean to be spiritual?
Think of it as attunement with not just others, but other humans, but plants and animals, you know, and this sort of awesome essence that's out there that's way grander than we are.
This awesome essence that kind of like the connectedness with God.
that's, a line from it is, and every blade of grass has an angel whispering grow, but that sense of divinity in, from a blade of grass to where, everywhere.
To it all.
To it all. But somehow it connects us.
It's an energy.
That's what this was.
A rhythm being present with what is, and just being alive to whatever is happening, and whatever is within us and around us.
The rhythm of being alive to what is ever is within us and around us.
To me, it's not, it's really being conscious of the fact that I'm not a human having a spiritual experience. I'm a spirit having a human experience.
Teilhard de Chardin. We're a spirit having a human experience. Well, I ask mainly because I just always wanted to know. And, thought you guys could give me a clue. Historically, spirituality has been pretty poorly defined. There's a lot of talk about it, but I'm not sure that the talk has always elicited a lot of clarity. And these days you hear spiritual talk in a lot of realms. There's like the spirituality of food and the spirituality of running, the spirituality of pet care. A lot of areas where spirituality is talked about. And, I'm not saying that these realms can't be spiritual, but the question is what is it that makes it spiritual? What is it that makes it spiritual? Even though spirituality has been difficult to define, it really hasn't stopped it from being a focus of research, especially in like the last 30 years. Meditation, for instance, has been really studied scientifically, beginning with Herbert Benson, who was at Harvard in the 1970s, who studied health outcomes for meditators. It's now progressed to where they're using really sophisticated brain imaging techniques to look at the differences that meditation makes, studying lifelong meditators, prayers, and finding fascinating stuff. For instance, one of the things that they've found is that people who spend a lot of time in prayer and meditation actually change the physical structure of their brain. They change the physical structure of their brain. The amygdala, which is often associated with emotional reactivity, tends to shrink, and while parts of the brain associated with executive function are increased. So, interesting research going on, especially in the medical field. There's an interesting report from the University of Maryland Hospital that has summarized some of the impacts of spirituality. And for instance, they discovered that people with AIDS who had some kind of religious sense, faith in God, compassion, compassion towards others, a sense of inner peace, had better outcomes, live longer than people who don't have belief systems like that. Find that things like faith, that a person's deeply held belief strongly influence health. There was a study in 1988 that showed that women undergoing biopsies, breast biopsies, that religious women had the best outcomes because they had the lowest levels of stress hormone in their systems. They used prayer and faith as a way to cope with stress. So, sense that spirituality makes a difference there. There's been research on the impact of hope. In one clinical study of Harvard graduate students, they found that those who had the most hope lived the longest. An interesting correlation. Forgiveness, an aspect which has often been attributed to spirituality, encouraged by a lot of spiritual traditions. In a study looking at Stanford University students, found that students trained to forgive people were significantly less angry, more hopeful, better able to deal with their own emotions. Prayer. There's interesting studies on prayer, putting oneself in the presence of or conversing with a higher power, the report said, has been used as a means of healing. And while it's sometimes difficult to really research it, one of the things that they found, like in coronary care units, is that people who are prayed for do better. It's not just them praying, but when people pray for other people, seems that they do better. Now, who knows what the cause is here, but this is all research, looking at the effects of these kind of spiritual aspects. In another clinical study, there were 230 adults undergoing heart surgery. And those who were religious were 3 times less likely to die within 6 months after surgery than those who were not. And of all of the people in the study who described themselves as deeply religious, none of them died. So obvious that this realm of spirituality has an impact in our living, somehow. But the question still remains, why is it? What's it about? How do we get a hold of it? About, in 1995, Daniel Goleman published a book called Spiritual Intelligence. And one of the things that he did was, rather than trying to define it, he looked at the characteristics of people who were generally thought to be spiritual. And what he did was said that spiritual intelligence is one of many intelligences that we have. There's an artistic intelligence, a math intelligence, many intelligences. Spiritual intelligence, Goleman thought, was another one of those intelligences. And then this woman by the name of Cindy Wigglesworth, I love that name, Wigglesworth, a serious researcher who followed Goldman, tried to lay out exactly what spiritual skills were. And in all of this work, though, it strikes me that there's an essential piece that's being missed, that isn't being caught. You know, we're trying to nail it down here and nail it down there. And it's a lot of work defining spirituality in terms of heightened awareness. And I think that's part of the story. But there's this whole other part that the scientists don't seem to want to play with, which, Wigglesworth kind of hints at it, but there's this part of spirituality that has to do with surrender. Surrendering oneself, one's ego, to something larger than oneself, some transcendent or higher power. It doesn't seem to make any difference what the higher power is called. It can be God, it can be Allah, it can be the Christ or Buddha mind, it can be the oneness, it can be the cosmic poobah of Pondicherry. It doesn't seem to matter what higher power is, but the willingness to surrender and to let go to that larger piece. In her writing, Wigglesworth talks about spiritual skills. And the spiritual skills that she would lay out are things like being aware of life purpose, aware of the interconnectedness of life, a number of things that we talked about here, of being aware of spiritual principles. These skills would include things like commitment to spiritual growth, being a healing presence with other people. And these are all good, but these are all awarenesses. And just being aware doesn't catch, for me, the essence. If we look and listen to spiritual mystics from all kinds of traditions through the centuries, one of the things that they talk about is that spirituality isn't all about this heightened enlightenment, wonderful growing piece of consciousness. They also talk about the essence of spirituality going deep and being difficult. Times that John of the Cross, 13th century mystic, and others have called dark nights of the soul. Times when all of this awareness that we often talk about in spiritual enlightenment, dark nights of the soul, are times when that spiritual awareness is turned off. Click. And there is no sense of connectedness. There is no sense of peace. There is no sense of love. And it all seems like a wasteland. And things seem dark and dreary and dank, maybe depressing, despairing. And the question is what carries people through those times? And is having had the awareness truly is key. But it takes something more. To make the passage through those bleak times of the Spirit means being willing to trust that one's perception of purpose, that one's awareness of connectedness were accurate and true and are still reliable, even though we might not be aware of them. It is to have a trust in that basic awareness and to surrender one's being into that trust. It's kind of like rock climbing. First time you ever rappel. What you do, to rappel well, you have to be at a right angle to the cliff. So you fasten your rope up here, you tie it on, and then you fall backwards till the rope catches you. Rappelling, I would suggest, is probably easier than the spiritual falling into the abyss, trusting that the perceptions of connectedness and love and wholeness are still true. But time and time again, that seems to be what the mystics have been able to do. Often takes a lot of support from community. That's always helpful. But the bottom line is that spirituality isn't just these soaring heights of awareness. It's also the plunging depths of self-examination and pain. David Steindl-Rast notes that the spiritual journey of becoming aware is continual. It never stops. There's always another step. He says that there's no limit to wakefulness, just as there's no limit to aliveness. To be awake and aware is to be awake and aware of it all. Of the joy as well as the sorrow. Of the birth as well as the death. Of the killing as well as the healing. Of the destruction as well as the destruction. Of love and hate, of tears and joy. To be on the spiritual journey is to risk the downside in order to know the upside. Is to choose the risks with our eyes wide open. To be on the journey is to know, is to risk that there will be more pain and sorrow. In fact, some would say it's a certainty. But the opposite of that risk is to go through our lives sound asleep and to never know any aliveness or vitality or love. Peace and blessings.